So welcome to our Exodus class. We will continue that. And hoping that and would love to have any questions or things that you want to send to me. Am I a little bit hot, John? Okay. Sounds, I hear myself real well. As we're taking a look at this, been looking at and asking questions, and that's what I really want, is if you have questions or you see things and want to cover things, please talk to me. Send me an email, send me a text message, or just call me. Write it on one of the prayer cards and put it in the box. Anyway, I don't want to pass over the details, and we want to cover some things. So as we've talked about the Hebrews being in Egypt, one of the things that we've looked at is what God was trying to do. What is Yahweh trying to accomplish with this? And it's more than just bringing the Israelites out of bondage. Although that was one of the things he wanted to do, to fulfill his promise to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. But it's also to teach the Egyptians, to have his name proclaimed, to humble Pharaoh, and also to give material to teach future generations. And last week, as we started to look at what goes on in the plagues, we got into a little bit of the whole idea of how much free will we have, or how much free will Pharaoh had, and if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, then how did he punish Pharaoh for doing what he made him to do? It doesn't seem very just. I think it was, I've lost him again, John Gasfoda pointed out to me in his study Bible last week, it says that Pharaoh, it said, Pharaoh hardened his own heart 9 times, and Lord hardened his heart 9 times. So it was kind of balanced. But what is going on there? And so last week we took a look at the 3 words, 3 Hebrew words that are used and translated in Exodus as harden at one place or another. The H number is a Strong's number. It's a reference number. So the Hebrew word H2388 is chazak, which all these words have both a concrete or literal meaning and a figurative meaning. So H2388 means a firm grip, but when you're talking about it in a figurative sense, or it will mean to encourage or to strengthen, to get a firm grip on things. H3513, which is the verb form, H3515 is the adverb form, is abad, or evade, and avad, literally talking about heavy. So when somebody is heavy in cruelty, then they're severe. Or if it talks about a body part, that your ears or somebody's ears or eyes are heavy, it means they're dull, they're not working right. The body part is being dysfunctional, not doing what it's supposed to do. If you're heavy in money, then you're rich. If you're heavy in charisma, then you have glory or honor. H7185 is a word that kasa means, it's literally meaning a yoke, or the way a ox reacts to a yoke that isn't comfortable. He rebels against it, which consequently means stubborn or rebellious. H7185 is only used twice in Exodus, once as hardened and once being translated as stubbornly refused. So, yes?
Was that did I miss that, or did you already show it?
No, I haven't shown it. It's too long to put up there. But if you'll send me an email or something, I can send you the entire list. There's a lot, like 15 or 20 times for one of the words. And so it's in there a lot. But not all of them are translated as harden. Let me see if I can bring this in a little bit. Exodus 14 and verse 4 actually has the two main words that we will have is, see if I can do this right and go back. H2388 is used a lot, and so is H33513 or H3515, which is the verb adjective form of that. Both of those words are in Exodus 14:4, where Yahweh is talking, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh, and they did so. Basically the same words, and both words are used in verse 17 of chapter 14. So obviously you can see one of them, harden. Where do you think the other one is used? This Hebrew word, it's not translated as harden here. It's the glory part. Well, that God is going to get glory. He's going to get heavy from this. It looks like this. And I will harden, which is encourage or strengthen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue you or pursue them, and I will get heavy. I will get glory over Pharaoh and his host, and the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh. Adds just a little bit different connotation or depth of meaning there. Here's another one, and this is where we'll actually start looking at the place today. Exodus 7, verses 13 and 14. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened. This is after the staffs turn into snakes, and then God's staff eats all the other snakes and then goes back into a staff. But the magicians duplicated it, so it said, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. And then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he refuses to let the people go. But it's two different words there that are both translated as hardened. So when you look at that and look at this, after the magicians duplicated the staff to snakes, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened. It was encouraged. It was strengthened in his stance. And he would not listen to them, to Moses and Aaron, as Yahweh had said. And then Yahweh says to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. It's dull. It's stubborn. It's not working right. He refuses to let the people go. So you can see that Pharaoh thinks he's being strong, and God says, no, he's just being stubborn. Any other questions or comments about? That's a very quick review. There's a lot of different ones there. Yes.
I was gone last week, so I apologize if y'all already talked about this, but, Paul asked this same question in Romans 9 when he says, how can God hold us accountable, and he talks about hardening Pharaoh's heart, but I always remember Pharaoh was a bad guy to begin with, and he just took him where he was at and just, used him where he was at. David was a man after God's own heart, but he didn't take David and make him into a bad guy. So it's not like God took a guy that was going to heaven and then hardened his heart and then made him a bad person and now he's going to hell. He uses us where we're at, basically.
Yes. Yeah, he does use it where he didn't make, that's what we're saying is, when it says that Yahweh hardened his heart, it's almost exclusively he strengthened him. It was as if he was telling Pharaoh, I don't want you to give in to me because you know you can't win. I want you to give in to me and submit to me because it's right. And Pharaoh and we'll see it several times as we go through the plagues, says, okay, I give in. You know, I can't win this. And God says, I don't want you to give in unless you are submitting to me. And he's not doing that. And so God strengthens him to continue on, knowing, you know, the end result, which he says all along. Jacob?
I still think that language is weird to use and maybe not what's necessarily intended, saying that like God's encouraging him. I don't think necessarily it's meant to be saying that God did anything as a secondary form of cause. I think God does things as a primary form of cause, but it's more, again, that he's allowing it to happen. It's not like, I don't think God is really trying, encouraging Pharaoh in any way. So I think that's an interesting choice and maybe an interesting thought, but I don't think that's really a great translation at all, using the word encouraged.
Courage, strengthen, the word, you know,
It
it's,
can mean that.
it
But
can
I
mean
think
it, and it's translated that way, so.
it's mostly translated as hardened for a reason,
Yeah.
though, and I think that is probably the best translation. But again, it's not necessarily that God is doing anything. It's
He's
more
not
that
changing Pharaoh.
allowing.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, using the word encouraged wouldn't be my choice.
Well, it wasn't the translator's choice either.
Yeah, right, and that's what I'm
But
saying.
we don't get, you know, I'm not saying harden is a bad translation. I'm saying in English, we don't get the connotation that runs behind that word.
Sure.
From them. So let's take a look at the first three plagues a little bit. Starting in Exodus 7, verse 14. Let me just read 14 through verse 25. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says Yahweh, By this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. And Yahweh said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, so that they may become blood, and there shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and vessels of stone. Moses and Aaron did as Yahweh commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up the staff and struck the water of the Nile. And all the water in the Nile turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink the water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahweh had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water from the Nile. 7 full days passed after Yahweh had struck the Nile. So let me back up. We've already talked about verse 14, and in verse 22, hardened there is the H2388, which is the firm grip, saying he is strengthened in his heart. So what did you notice as we read through that? What did you see happen? How many of you saw Charlton Heston on the bank of the? Debbie?
So my question, how can the magicians of Egypt turn the Nile to blood when it's already blood? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of, I've always been a little confused by that because, you know, Moses has turned, you know, through God's power, has turned things to blood. So if the magicians really wanted to impress, it seems like they would turn it back to water. But I've just always been kind of confused why it said they did the same thing, but it was already done, so.
If everything is, if all the water is turned in the Nile and the canals and in their ponds and in their vessels of wood and their vessels of stone is already turned to blood, what did they have, what water did they have to turn into blood? That's a good question. I've wondered the same thing. Larry?
What's the time frame between Moses turning it into blood and the magicians turning it into blood? Because after a few days, this blood here is gonna be out in the Mediterranean, and there's fresh water coming from upstream to fill the Nile again.
There's that, and there is also, although that doesn't happen as quickly as you might think sometimes, from the time I'm fishing on the Washita River, to get from western Oklahoma down to around Pauls Valley, it would take 10 or 12 days. We go down there and the river's up, and I'm like, it hasn't rained.
Yeah, but it could have been a month
Yeah, it could have been a month.
from the time Moses did it till the time the magicians did it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not given time frames in here, and it could have been a long time in between plagues.
Yeah. We do know that, I mean, how long are you going to go without water without getting thirsty? And if the water stinks, then they're gonna dig beside the Nile. We know that they did that to get water. Is that where they got the water? I can't directly answer your question because I don't have an answer, but it would seem to me that they dug along and that there was a time period, a period of time between the Nile and all the water becoming blood and then them getting water to duplicate it. There's also a period of time here because even if the fish kill is immediate, they don't start stinking for a few days, right? Have you ever been around a massive fish kill? Have you ever been around a dead fish? It's awful. So everything, the water stinks. Which, can you imagine the economic impact that would have on Egypt? They lived on the river. You know there were fishermen, and that fish was a part of their diet. All of a sudden, that entire industry is wiped out. One of the sources of food is gone. And if all the fish are dead, you know it's going to take a while for fish either from upstream to get down there, or, you know, there's not going to be any big fish around for a few years. This is a huge economic impact. Yeah.
Does it say that that happened after, or did that trick have been seen before at some point? Of, you know,
Of the magicians turning to water?
turning some water into blood. And I didn't understand whether that was just something that maybe that trick had already been seen.
It doesn't
in a
indicate that it's.
small- In a small way, and then Moses just lays it out across the entire country and says, yeah, I'll show you how to do this one.
Yeah.
Or whether that has anything to do with it.
That's not mentioned at all. There's nothing that I've seen that would indicate it had been done before, but by their secret arts, they managed to duplicate it enough that Pharaoh says, okay, there's nothing magnificent about that other than it was everywhere. And whatever they duplicated, it couldn't have been as universal because it was already everywhere. And apparently this lasted at least a week because it was 7 days. Verse 25, 7 full days passed. Other questions?
Like I said, Pharaoh probably would have been a lot more convinced if his magicians could turn the blood back into water.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been a good thing, you would think. Part of my imagery is I'm thinking, can you imagine we see this happening and more or less there in front of Pharaoh, and so the people with Pharaoh would have known. What about the guy 50 miles away that brought in the water that morning, and he comes back to get a drink of water, and it's blood inside his house? Now, here's the other question. Did the Israelites experience the same thing? It doesn't really say one way or the other. It talks about the Egyptians, but almost everybody is universal as they read this, because later Yahweh says, I will make a distinction. So the implication is he did not make a distinction here. That this also happened in the land of Goshen, which is part of the river, the Nile River Delta area. So that their water also turned to blood. There is a comment in the life and works of Josephus. Josephus, you remember, was a first century historian. So he records that, at least in the first century, 1,500 years after all this, that the rabbis were teaching the water was not only the color of blood, but it brought upon those who ventured to drink it great pains and bitter torment. Such was the water for the Egyptians, but it was sweet and fit for drinking to the Hebrews, and in no way different from what it naturally used to be. That's Josephus. I don't know. But even that is an indication that the water in Goshen turned to blood as well, and the water stinks. Okay, let's look at the second plague. Exodus 8, 1 through 15. Then Yahweh said to Moses, go into Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Yahweh, let my people go that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your ovens, into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and your people, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all your servants. And Yahweh said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, plead with Yahweh to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go sacrifice to Yahweh. Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile. And he said, tomorrow. Moses said, be it as you say, so that you may know that there is none like Yahweh our God. The frogs shall go away from you, and your houses, and your servants, and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to Yahweh about the frogs as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And Yahweh did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together into heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened, which is H35:13, dulled, heavy, his heart, and would not listen to them as Yahweh had said. Frogs are everywhere. Even in your ovens, in your beds, everywhere. What did you notice? What are your questions? What are your comments on this story? John?
Like Debbie said about the blood kind of, if there were frogs everywhere, it says the magicians were able to do the same thing, but if there were frogs everywhere, I mean, where did they find a place to,
Yeah.
to show they could create more frogs?
Here, froggy, froggy. Yeah. I got them to come up. I don't know. Did they sweep them all out of Pharaoh's room and then they called them back in? I just know it says they duplicated it. They did the same thing. And Pharaoh said, yeah, fine. But to go back to Terry's comment, did Pharaoh not ask his magicians to make them go away? But when he wanted the frogs to go away, who did he call? Moses and Aaron. And I thought there was a very nice kind of play on words. Pharaoh says, make them go away. And Moses says, well, I can plead and they will be cut off, which is a synonym for died. And I'm thinking to myself, when they all died where they were, is dead frogs that much less of a plague than live ones? It's a lot quieter. You can sleep better at night. I hadn't thought about that part. Yeah. Good.
The junior high kid in me, I always liked the line, my mom used to be afraid of frogs. And it's one thing to hold it and show it up, but the verse there says the frogs will come up on you and on your people. And you can imagine, them jumping on them and not just being in those places, but on them in person.
Jumping on you, you open a cabinet door and there's frogs in there. That is, and when it says frogs, we're not talking about toads. We're talking about, I think of leopard frogs, the smooth skin, looking damp, feeling damp kind of thing. Or a saw hand. Renee? Yeah.
Why the delay?
Some rabbis point out the fact that Moses is, in essence, still submitting to Pharaoh. Says, you command me. I will plead to Yahweh for you. And that there is a precision in this that never happened in polytheism. That they would offer sacrifices and things might slowly occur. But to set a date and a time for this to happen, and so that you would know that Yahweh is in control, it will happen when you ask for it. And that is a precision that the magicians could not offer, that the Egyptian religion could not offer, that their idolatry didn't provide. Yes, Randy.
And it also reinforces
The children of Israel were not all sure about Moses when he came to make this presentation to them. And this is reaffirming what Moses said is true, that he was sent by the I am that I am.
Yeah,
And he is going to perform what he's told to do.
yeah. The Israelites waffled back and forth, then they're like, okay, we believe you. Oh, wait a minute, life is harder. We don't believe you. No, okay. And I come back to the same question. Did this affect the land of Goshen? Did this affect the Israelites? Again, apparently so. There's no indication that it did not. And again, what would be the reaction of the Israelites going through this as well? I found it interesting to me that in the first plague, the water stinks. Now in the second plague, the land stinks. You know, this place here in Egypt, that the land, they settled in the land of Goshen because it was a great land, because it was exactly suited. And now then the water and the land stinks. Maybe it is time to move out of this.
One of my musings in this has been the tomorrow comment. This crafty Pharaoh guy, maybe he was hedging his bet. I'm going to talk to my guys today, but just in case they can't do anything, how about tomorrow?
Maybe,
I don't know. There's no way of knowing for sure.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting, the whole comment of tomorrow.
Did Pharaoh, and I'm going to repeat this because I've been told a lot of times people can't hear in the back. Is Pharaoh hedging his bet by telling Moses and Aaron tomorrow, and he goes to his magicians and says, you guys got till tomorrow to get this done? You know, I don't know. Or if he'd already been to them and they couldn't do it, so okay, let me call Moses and Aaron. If they brought them on, maybe they can make them go away. I don't know. Oh, and there's one other thing I forgot to mention. We're going to look at these in the first 9 plagues. 3 and 3 and 3 is the plan. And they are written kind of in that style that you're supposed to do 3 and 3 and 3. Because in number 1 and number 4 and number 7, all of them happen. Yahweh tells Moses and Aaron to go to Pharaoh in the morning. The first 2 in the morning at the Nile, probably the third one doesn't say at the Nile, but it was probably so. A lot of people theorize that it was a regular morning ritual for Pharaoh to go to the Nile and either offer sacrifice or whatever his polytheism did, but seemed to be a regular practice for Pharaoh to go to the Nile and go to the river in the morning. But in 1 and 4 and 7, Yahweh specifically tells, it's written down, in the morning, go see Pharaoh. So we're going to look at it in that way. Anything else about frogs? Anybody want a house of frogs tomorrow? Okay, let's look at the third plague. Exodus 8:16 through 19. Very short passage. Then Yahweh said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth. And there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God, or this is the finger of Elohim, or gods. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, again, firm grip, encouraged or strengthened, and he would not listen to them as Yahweh had said. Does everybody's translation have gnats? Lice. Yeah, is the other translation. Huh? Lice just crawl, gnats get in your nose, yeah. If I looked at it, it was King James Version, New King James Version, American Standard Version, and a few others translated as lice. Most of the more recent English translations use gnats. And so I'm like, okay, my question was, how long did all this last? I don't know, so I started, well, how long does a gnat live? Gnats, I found out, supposedly there are about 5,000 species of gnats in the world. And they're all 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch in size. Also known as no-see-ums. I've heard that, I always wonder, what's a no-see-um? Well, it's one of these little bitty flies, or sand flies. There was one I hadn't heard, biting midges. Okay, you've heard it. I'm like, what's a biting midge? I have no idea, but I have had experience with gnats that just were horrible at this one fishing place I was, and so I coated myself in spray except right around the edges of my lips, and when I got back to the mirror, I'm like, I've had Botox. So anyway, these gnats are everywhere. Generally, there's 5,000 different species, and they're all different. Their entire life cycle is about a month, 1 to 2 months, from egg to larva to pupa to adult. Most of the adult flies, adult gnats, live anywhere from 7 to 14 days. So I'm thinking these things are around for a week, 2 weeks, maybe. The length of time is not mentioned in the text, but what question does that bring up?
They just stuck around, or I guess not, didn't reproduce as in a normal life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, are gnats biting you and your animals less of a plague than frogs? If Pharaoh asked Moses to get rid of the frogs, why is he saying, okay, this is worse? I mean, frogs are inconvenient or smelly, and I don't like them in my house, but they're not biting me. That's what gnats do. How is this less of a plague? It's not. Why isn't he asking for them to be relieved? You know, maybe his heart is hardened. I mean, even his magicians now are saying, I don't know that the Egyptians are the first ones, the magicians are the first ones to say, this is Yahweh. They said, this is the finger of the gods. Well, the Egyptians had 1,500 to 2,000 gods. So, you know, and again, were the Israelites exempted from this? Apparently not. So there's gnats in Goshen too. This place isn't as comfortable as it used to be.
So this was in the Nile Delta, correct?
Yes.
Were there not gnats there to begin with? I mean, generally those low-lying areas, that's where you're gonna find gnats.
I don't, yeah.
Just like more gnats,
This is a whole lot more gnats. I mean, there's always been gnats, like there's always been frogs. They just weren't covering me up.
Seven-year hatch.
7-year hatch or whatever, yeah. So these are everywhere. They're biting you, they're biting your children, they're biting the animals. As we go through the plagues, you will notice that they are increasing along two different axes, that as we go through, that they are increasing in their power, but also in their precision. That these are gradually getting worse and worse, and yet God is getting more and more precise through all 10 plagues. He is ramping this up, and he's showing, I am. You know, how long will you remain stubborn? So, again, there's different theories on how long all these plagues take place. Anywhere from, I think the shortest I've read about is all of these happen within a month. I think that's a little bit short. To a year and a half to 2 years. But again, think about the impact this is having on the Egyptians and on the Israelites, that they are experiencing these things, they're seeing these things, and beginning to realize that this Yahweh is strong and powerful. Jay?
And one of the things that we see at the end is that even the Egyptian people acknowledge that. As the Israelites are about to go, it says that they found favor. The Israelites found favor in the eyes of the Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
And it even says that Moses himself was a man of great importance in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's officials and in the sight of the people. You guys may have talked about this last week, but the gods, as you said, they have many gods in Egypt. And it looks like what God is doing is he's not really going toe-to-toe with their gods, because there aren't any, they have no power. But that's what God wants them to see. The Israelites and the Egyptians. You have a god or a goddess of the Nile, or of water, or of the land, or you have a fertility goddess who has the head of a frog. Let me show you that I am far more powerful than any of your gods. That I can bring it and then I can take it away. I can even take the stuff that your God is in charge of, the land, and turn it into something else. I can take the dust of the ground and make it into gnats. So, to your point, it is working on the people of Israel, right? They're getting to see who I am is. But in the fashion of the God of the Bible, he's showing all the peoples of the earth who he is
Yes.
and what he's like.
Yeah, it's not just, I mean, this is something that God says, this will be talked about forever. And here we are, 3,500, 4,000 years later, and we're still talking about it. This is an incredible display of who he is and what he is like. So next week has already been announced, we will not have class. So then June 2nd, we will cover Exodus 8:20 through the rest of chapter 8 and into the first part of chapter 9. Plagues 4, 5, and 6. Between now and then, hopefully you'll take a chance to read through that. Write down your questions. Bring them or send them to me ahead of time. But we'll do that. June 2nd is going to be a busy Sunday again, because in 2 weeks we'll have the baby dedication in the worship service. And then also that evening is welcome for Tucker and Elizabeth Sullivan. They will be here that evening. They won't be here that morning, but they'll be here that evening. And just as you pray about their transition, this is the last Sunday at their congregation in Tyler. So, Larry, you had something? Oh, Randy.
I'm just gonna add that it's the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th plagues that Israel is spared,
Yes, yeah. Going forward,
where it specifically states that.
yes, going forward, the Yahweh says, in fact, in the next one, he says, now, in this precision, I'm going to make a distinction between your people and my people. So, yeah, take a look at that. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks.